Welcome to another episode of For the Record. My name is Katia Richardson and I'm a lawyer in Vancouver, Canada. On this channel, we're looking at common legal problems, things that might pop up in your everyday life. I'm going to analyze the problem for you, and although I'm not able to give you legal advice, I'm going to take you through the steps of analysis that a lawyer would take if they were looking at your legal problem. By going through these steps together, you'll be able to diagnose your own legal problem and you'll know what steps to take next to try to resolve it. Chances are, if you've clicked on this video, it's because you were recently laid off due to COVID-19 or you're worried that you might become laid off. And if that's the case, first of all, I want to say that I'm sorry you're finding yourself in that position. It's extremely difficult, but it has been for countless people around the world. In Canada, over 2 million people have applied for employment insurance since March, and in the US, there are reports that about 16.8 million people have applied for unemployment aid. And if you're finding yourself in this position, you might be going through a whole roller coaster of emotions right now. You might be feeling angry, you might be feeling confused about why your employer made that decision, you might be feeling anxious about how you pay your bills or if you're going to be able to find another job right now. And you might also have reached a point of acceptance, acknowledging that this has happened and it was beyond your control and it has little to do with your performance or your capabilities, and it's just something that everybody is going through right now. You do want to move towards that frame of mind, even though we're all entitled to go through the stages of grief and all of the emotional stuff that comes up after a termination. By moving to this whole frame of mind of acceptance, you'll be able to approach your termination with a more objective kind of frame of mind that'll allow you to really pursue your legal entitlements to make sure that you're being compensated as you should be. Still, you probably have a bunch of questions right now. First of all, you want to know, was your employer allowed to do this? Second, you want to know whether you are owed compensation or if your employer did pay you compensation, if they've paid you enough. And lastly, if you are owed compensation, you'll want to know how to go about actually getting it. The answers to these questions will vary depending on the situation, but if you stay tuned to this video, I'll take you through the steps of analysis that you can apply to your own situation so that you'll be able to answer each of these questions yourself and you'll know what next steps you should be taking. So the first question, are they allowed to do this? Well, the answer is generally yes. An employer can terminate your working relationship at any point in time. And you know what? They don't actually need to give you a reason for doing it. This is called termination without cause. But there's one major caveat to all of that, which is that if they terminate you without cause, they either need to give you notice or they need to give you compensation in lieu of that notice. What does that look like? We'll just say, for example, that at law, you were entitled to 6 weeks notice. And this is going to vary, and I'll get into that in the next question. But just as an example, say you're entitled to 6 weeks. They either need to give you notice and allow you to continue working for 6 weeks at your usual salary, or what's done more often, and which just practically makes more sense most of the time, is instead of having you work those 6 weeks knowing that you're going to be terminated, is to pay you out. They compensate you for what you would have received if you had continued to work for that 6-week period. So yes, all that to say that they are allowed to let you go whenever they choose, and they do not need to give you a reason. Question 2, are you owed compensation? Before diving into this question, it's really important to have a good understanding of exactly what has happened, because people tend to throw around the term laid off and it can actually have several different meanings. First of all, if you were permanently laid off, also called terminated, then that means that your employer has said that they're ending your position with the company and you can pack up your things and you won't be expected to return to work. If this is the case, then you can go straight to question 3 because you are entitled to compensation, and we'll talk about how much. Now, the last situation, which is also really common right now, is a temporary layoff. So as opposed to a permanent layoff where you you're not expecting to ever return to work. With a temporary layoff, your employer will tell you, I promise you will return to work, but right now I just can't afford to keep you on. So they might give you an exact number of weeks when you can expect to return to work, or they might just generally tell you when things improve. You know, that's common right now with COVID-19, that when the situation improves and when business picks up, then you will return to work. Generally speaking, in normal times, if you have been temporarily laid off, then you are entitled to compensation. However, there are a number of exceptions. So it's important to see whether you fall into one of these exceptions. And I'll take you through a series of questions now so you can answer that for yourself. First off, are you unionized? This is important because if you're in a unionized position, you'll have a collective bargaining agreement, and that agreement might have terms which allow for a temporary layoff. It's quite common actually in unionized positions that the employer is allowed to lay you off, and so it'll have some terms in your collective agreement about whether they are responsible for compensating you during that period or not. And you would probably want to consult with one of your union representatives to figure out whether you're entitled to anything right now. If you're not a unionized employee, do you have an employment contract? And if you do have an employment contract, you should check the contract to see whether there are any terms in there about a layoff. If it doesn't say anything in there about it, then the next question to ask yourself is, have you agreed to a temporary layoff in the same position before? If you have agreed to a temporary layoff before, this establishes a precedent and makes it seem like it's acceptable, that it's an accepted term of your employment contract, that from time to time, your employer may temporarily lay you off. The last question you want to ask yourself is, was your company forced to close because of a government directive? And this will really change depending on what jurisdiction you're in. For example, in Ontario, all businesses were forced to close, but in British Columbia, a lot of businesses have remained open. There are still some businesses that were forced to close, like nail salons and gyms. So the problem is that if your company was forced to close and it really had no other option but to lay you off, your employment contract with them has become what we call frustrated. They aren't able to fulfill the terms of the employment contract. It's just not possible. Now, the last and final question is, how do you actually go about getting compensation? So if you've gone through all of the questions up till this point and concluded that you may be entitled to compensation, or you are most likely entitled to compensation, now before considering making an argument or a claim for compensation from your employer, think about the nature of your employment right now. So if you've been temporarily laid off, you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want to wait until your employer calls you back to work? Or do you want to pursue that compensation? And if you do, then your employment with that company will be deemed to have ended. The things you want to take into consideration when deciding which route you want to go are things like, has your employer given you a good sense of when you will return to work? So did they just generally tell you, we hope to have you come back someday? Or did they tell you definitively, in this number of weeks, we're going to have you back, or as soon as this event takes place, we're going to have you back? You definitely want to gauge where your employer's at and the level of confidence that you have that they're going to live up to their promise to have you return to work, and that it's going to take place within a reasonable period of time. Other things that you want to think about are, is it going to be easy for you to get government benefits, and how long will those continue to be paid out, and how difficult would it be for you to find another job right now? These are all things that you have to consider. But you shouldn't dismiss the option of going after compensation just hoping that your employer will have you back. And here's why. Because you know that your company is not performing well financially right now, which is why they've laid you off. And most likely there's other employees that are in the exact same boat as you, and they're going to be wondering about compensation. So if you wait too long to claim compensation, then your company may not actually have the money to pay you what you're entitled to. And that's a big problem. And there's almost no way around that. If your company doesn't have the money, then it doesn't matter if you're entitled to it or not. So if you're in the position of believing that you may be entitled to compensation and you're not really prepared to wait it out, and you're not really sure on when and whether your company is going to hire you back, I would recommend that you speak with a lawyer. A lot of lawyers offer free consultations, so they'll be able to sit down with you. You can explain a little bit about your situation, what's been going on. Hopefully after watching this video, you'll be able to frame it to them in a way that's easy for them to understand and quickly analyze. And they should be able to tell you whether you are in fact entitled to compensation, and if so, how much. And they would have a plan in place for helping you get that compensation. Usually it would start with sending out a letter to your employer, letting them know how much exactly you are entitled to, and then they would try to negotiate a settlement for you. And if that doesn't work and it seems worth it, they might even start a court action for you. If you're curious about how much you could be entitled to, that amount will vary depending on a number of factors, including your age, your years of service with the company, your level of seniority with the company. There could be another employee at the same company as you who's entitled to more or less compensation. And there are calculators online where you can plug in some information relating to these factors, and it'll give you an estimated range of what you could be entitled to. I'm going to link in the description box below a calculator that I like, that I think provides really good information about what you could be entitled to. But I would definitely recommend speaking with a lawyer before you take those next steps towards claiming any entitlement or any compensation. So that concludes the steps that I wanted to take you through to help you understand whether you have a right to compensation, and if so, what you should do about it. I hope that you found the information in this video helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave those comments in the comment section below. Until next time, this has been For the Record.